Strange, yet true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. Manitoba Bigfoot Encounter. This story was first submitted to Sasquatch Chronicles. This account was written by a woman named Petra living in Manitoba at the time of the event. In the telling of her own encounter, she also includes information on 2 other encounters she learned of later from family and a friend. For more stories like this, visit SasquatchChronicles.com. I have never told this story to anyone. At the time it happened, I was coming to the end of a messy divorce after a more than 20-year marriage. I truly felt if I said anything, those that cared about me, they would have thought I had cracked under the emotional stress of the time. In the spring of 2007, I was making my way out of a long-term, less than uplifting marriage. I had lived in the small town of Pinawa for more than 20 years at that point. It is located in the eastern region of Manitoba. It is rural, with a population at that time of about 1,200 people. I had trained as a veterinary technician, and prior to marrying, I had worked for the government vet clinic in the area, mostly a large animal practice. But because we were the government vet, at times we had to deal with wildlife matters, so I was not a stranger to animal behavior. After I had children and I was a full-time mom, I also did some injured wildlife rehabilitation for the DNR on a limited basis. The local DNR supervisor for the area was a neighbor and a friend, and it was an unofficial position, helping him out at times and giving my children a unique opportunity to interact with animals that otherwise would be off limits. Because of the divorce, I had begun to make it my habit to get up very early, usually before dawn, to walk the trails outside of town, clear my head, get my game face on for the day ahead, and try to be out of striking distance as the ex got ready for work. Things were really tense as I had filed for divorce, and in the midst of sorting and packing, the less time we spent together, the better. It was May. The snow was gone. The weather was warming, and I headed towards the dead end of the highway and across the path that was adjacent to the golf course and towards a causeway of sorts that had been created between the lake and a river channel that was a man-made diversion dam. The granite had been blasted out of the shield, and the area had many granite rock piles that have managed to acquire a few trees clinging to the sparse earth that has blown in the crevasse of those piles. So to the right of me there is a lake. To the left, on the causeway, is a small canyon, sheer granite walls, and a drop of more than 60 feet, probably closer to 100 feet, to the river below. There are a few faster areas on this river, but no whitewater and nothing even close. The channel and the trail finish at Old Pinawa Dam, a heritage park on the site of an old hydro dam and town site of the original Pinawa that was abandoned in the 40s, I believe. It is about less than 10 kilometers away as the crow flies and has relevance to my story. As I walked to the entrance of the causeway, the first thing I noticed was 2 crushed garter snakes at my feet. It was odd, because one was badly crushed, and I couldn't figure out how it had gotten there. No cars could drive where I was now. The highway was about 100 meters behind me, with no way that I could imagine it could have gotten there. The second snake was still alive, but very bent, and I thought it very strange that raccoons or the otters that are in the area did not find them. It was too early for snakes to be out yet. In the spring, we get large mating balls of garter snakes where hundreds of snakes can be wrapped in a ball. The very area I was walking was a spot where all the local kids knew snakes could be found by the hundreds. Turning over a few granite rocks or reaching into the rock crevices would yield handfuls of snakes. But even if it was kids who had done this the day before, it was odd that they should still be here on the path. At the very least, crows will quickly pick up a snake in the open. I scooped the one still alive and placed him off to the side in the grass. It was about this time I noticed a bear in front of me, about 200 feet or 60 meters slightly off to my right, standing on all fours in the water near the edge of the lake, its back to me. The sun was up now, but not by much, and I scanned the shoreline for cubs. I watched as it took a massive dump in the lake, The old saying, "Does a bear shit in the woods?" ran through my mind, with the response, "No, apparently he doesn't. He shits in my lake. And it shits a lot." The draft horses I had could not easily match the amount that was dropping out of this thing. I began to think the bear looked odd. Really odd. Just as the thought formed, the bear began to stand up, and I realized it was no bear at all. I guess at full height, it was well over 8 feet tall. It was hair-covered and black. It swiveled at the waist, did not turn its head at all. Rather, its whole upper body turned towards the left. Then its legs followed, and it stood side on to me for a split second. In one fluid motion, it was out of the water, on the back, and moving towards the tree line directly in front of me. It looked like it was on skates. The movement was like nothing I could understand. I was frozen on the spot. I was only about 200 feet away. It turned towards me for just a split second, showing me its teeth and giving me a sound that was low and rumbling. I could see its face. Not human at all. Well, I guess perhaps in some sense it was, but it was not normal at all. The eyes seemed dark, but from that distance, it was more of an impression than actual sight. The mouth, however, was huge. It had shown me its teeth twice, making a kind of a grimacing face as it did so. Directly behind the creature, there was a kerfuffle in the bush. I have never been so scared. There was another one in the trees, a further 10 meters beyond the black one standing in front of me. I remember thinking about keeping my knees locked. I felt like the blood was draining out of me. I needed to get back across the causeway. I was only about 10 meters across the causeway when I was stopped in my tracks by what I thought had been a bear. I needed to back out of there. That was the only way out. But there was a narrowing where 2 granite rock piles were stacked at the start of the trail on either side of the path. I was worried if I stumbled walking backwards, I would never be able to get up. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I actually felt dizzy and sick with fright. But there was only one thing for it, and that was to back up slowly. I got to being about even with the granite rock piles, and I heard a loud roar from the bush. The first creature that I had mistaken for a bear was now moving to the trees, and he moved in such a way that he almost looked like he floated into the tree line as the most massive bones-shaking roar came from the woods. It was a bellow, a roar like a lion. It shook your insides as it blew through you. As if that wasn't enough, I heard something to the left of me on the far side of the rock pile. I was parallel with the rock pile at this time. I couldn't swallow. I could hardly breathe. And I was focusing on locking my knees with every step I took backwards. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of the clatter of rocks sliding on the backside of the pile. I would guess the pile was about 30 feet wide and about 20 feet tall. There were some grasses and bushes and a few scrubby trees on the rock pile, but it was mostly still granite boulders. The roar in front of me and the clatter of the smaller rocks falling to the left of me had made me stop in my tracks again. I was pretty much parallel to the rock pile at this point, perhaps just a few steps past its center. I was willing myself to just move my foot, take another slow, deliberate step back. More rocks tumbling behind the pile. Ahead, there was still movement in the woods, though the tall, black-haired creature was now mostly hidden from sight. Slowly backing up, another few steps would have me past the rock pile. But it was then I saw some movement not 20 feet from me, to the left and up. About 6 or 8 feet above my head and 20 feet to the left, I saw the glint of auburn and brown hair. It was just an arm. A massive, muscled, gigantic arm was reaching around the rock pile. I could see a hand which seemed remarkably less hair-covered than I would have thought. with what were clearly fingernails, though dirt and debris covered. I distinctly remember the knuckles, which seemed very large, like deformed, large, bulbous even, almost like someone with very dire arthritic and swollen knuckle joints, on a large hand with long fingers and attached to a ridiculously large arm. I was still moving backwards, slowly, steadily moving. I saw no more of creature number 3 than the arm and shoulder. It did not peer around the rock pile to look at me, that I could see at least. Where it had come from, I have no idea. It had almost gotten behind me as the other 2 had me distracted ahead. I was now past the rock pile, backing up slowly, backing down a small dip, and back up an incline that had obscured my sight of the arm. When I was up the incline, I could not see the arm anymore. All I could do was pray that they were all 3 in front of me, and that there was not a 4th creature waiting to nab me as I continued to back towards the dead end of the highway. When I got to the road, I turned tail and ran. I made it only about 200 meters before I was throwing up at the side of the road and shaking like a leaf from head to toe. It was a mind-numbing, stumbling run to the street I turned down and to the house about half a kilometer away. Okay, what did I know about Bigfoot before I stepped out the door that morning? Well, at 14, I had read a book by John Green, not much of one, a thin paperback as I recall. It was in the school library. Like all other kids around the same time, I had seen the Patterson-Gimlin film. I was living in Alberta when I was 14, and I did think there was some kind of Sasquatch creature living in the Rocky Mountains. However, about 10 years prior to my sighting, I was working for a time in the town that was adjacent to Pinawa. I was working in a seniors care facility there doing activities with some of the residents. The facility was geared toward long-term care for acute patients suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's, as well as other degenerative geriatric conditions. One of my Alzheimer gentlemen was difficult to engage as he succumbed to the progressive nature of the disease. Nevertheless, I had stumbled onto something that sometimes would reach some of the difficult far-gone cases, and that was to try and associate past memories with a strong sense of smell. Childhood and early adult years linger in the memories much longer than the more recent past for many of the Alzheimer patients. The sense of smell seemed to be a powerful invoker of memories, if you could access it. My gentleman had at one time been a mailman to the now abandoned site of Old Pinawa. The mail would come from a town northwest of the Old Pinawa and was the closest depot back in the early 1940s when his story took place. The road was what was called a corrugated road, made of logs laid down on it, and the only reliable way was to still take the mail and supplies in by horse and wagon, as the cars just couldn't make the trip, I was told. My old guy used to be that driver when he was a young man, and one afternoon I brought in a used harness from my draft horse, with the old Scotch top collar embedded with the hair and sweat from more than one horse. Old George took the collar and right away started smelling the leather, the horse sweat, and dirt, and a story began to spill out of him. One that I knew was true because his Alzheimer's made it impossible for him to recount a tale that wasn't true at this point in his illness. He had worked in the spring of that year on that road, the road that shook the bones right out of you, he said. And it was the last spring he worked there. It was when he stopped doing the mail run. He quit the job and went off to work in the mines after that. He claimed he was chased by a hair-covered giant. He said an Indian fellow he knew back then told him the Ojibwe called them the wild men. They often saw them on the trap lines and in the swamps. On this day, he was seeing the giant wild man for himself. His horse was so badly spooked, he was sure he was going to get ripped from limb to limb as this creature yelled and bellowed at him and snapped the trees off along the road. He kept driving the horse on, kept moving, but his head down. He said he was pretending like he couldn't hear or see the things. But all he could do was hear and see it, he said. I didn't press him at all. I could see the memory was still a fearful one even after all these years. But George talked for about an hour straight that afternoon, and he had been pretty much silent for the most part up to then. A word or two, maybe a sentence on a good day. But that afternoon, with the harness in his hands, the story poured out of him about his last mail run and the wild man. This has been another strange but true story. Thanks to the people at Sasquatch Chronicles. Check out their website at sasquatchchronicles.com. Have you ever had an encounter with a Bigfoot or something that you can't quite explain? Then tell us about it. Email us at strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. I'm Steve White. Until next time.